check with the committee secretary whether there are any apologies tendered for today's meeting.
Chair, I have not received any yet, Chair. I assume the others will join us during the course of the meeting. They might have connectivity challenges, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, that's fine. Can we have a move and a seconder for the adoption of the agenda, which will look at the NGB's 2021-22 annual report and the first quarter 2022-2023. Honorable Moatse.
Thank you very much, Chair. I move for adoption of the agenda as presented.
Thank you very much. Can we have a seconder for the adoption of the agenda? Members, can we have a seconder for the adoption of the agenda, please?
Sorry, Chair, I second the adoption of the agenda.
Thank you very much. The agenda is duly adopted. So the purpose of today's meeting of the Portfolio Committee is to receive a briefing from the National Gambling Board to engage on its financial and non-financial performance for 2021-2022 financial year. This would include a briefing on its financial and non-financial performance for the first quarter of 2022-23 financial year. This is also so that the committee can assess the performance of the National Department of the NGB against its resource allocation in compliance with Section 5 of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act 9 of 2009. Thank you very much. I think the person from the department to introduce the entity is led by Ms. Matomela. Ms. Matomela.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, and good morning to the honorable members and everyone in the meeting. My name is Nontombi Matomela. I am the Acting Chief Operations Officer for the DTIC. And as the Chair has indicated, we are looking at the 2021-22 report of the NGB as well as the quarter one. And leading the team from the NGB side, Chair, is Ms. Caroline Kongwa, and he will be taking the Portfolio Committee through the presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kongwa.
Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, Chairperson. My name is Caroline Kongwa, as introduced by Ms. Matomela. I'm here with colleagues of mine, Mr. Kwatsi Mashamaite, Chief Compliance Officer, and then Yvonne Gwenwure, who is our economic researcher, Mr. Shelton Pagiwa, who's our Senior Manager, Gaming Technology, and our CFO, Ms. Kaveshka Makadav. If you'll allow me, I could proceed to begin with the presentation.
Yes, you can start sharing your presentation and then do the presentation. Thank you very much.
Are you able to see the presentation?
Not yet. Can you just go into full screen mode, please?
Is it appearing now?
Yes, it is appearing, but it's not in full screen mode.
Let me try again, because on my side, it is on the full screen mode. Let me try again. Are you able to see it now?
Yes, thank you. It's on full screen mode. You may proceed.
Okay, so We are invited today to present to you the report back on the annual report 2021-22 and also our performance regarding Q1 2022-23 financial year. So we will start with the annual report. We highlighted certain areas just to give a highlight of the report, and the more detailed report has been tabled in Parliament by Minister so far. Our mandate still remains where we deal with evaluation of issuance of licenses by provinces. We also conduct oversight evaluation of the performance of the provinces and how it is they comply with national and provincial legislation. We also assist provinces to ensure that unlicensed gambling activities are detected. We look at monitoring market share and market conduct. We're also entrusted to maintain the national registers. We also conduct various research, and we conduct public awareness, and where necessary, we also are entrusted to ensure we advise Minister in the DTIC and any other stakeholders regarding gambling related matters. So highlight for the financial year, we are proud to announce we achieved our 7th consecutive clean audit. I think that is also set out in the annual report from AG's report. Just to give you a snippet also on industry performance, there's been a good rebound, which has seen gross gambling revenue revert back to pre-COVID levels. So the industry is doing fairly well in terms of how its performance prior to, the COVID pandemic era. Also, what has changed is the betting sector actually is accounting for 44.9% of market share. This was a different situation prior to COVID when the casino industry accounted for approximately 60%. And then tax collection has also increased to 3.2 billion, which has also reached the pre-COVID pandemic levels. In this slide, we're giving you an indication of gambling sector performance. It's just a snapshot on how we fare and compare. So basically, if you see the first column, our total our total gross gambling revenue was sitting at about 23 billion. And as I've indicated from the previous slide, we're now at 34 billion. So we've seen, that comeback. The other figures, are the details per mode of gambling, but I think that's something that stands out. Also, collection of tax has increased by approximately, over 1 billion. So this was just to give you a snapshot of overall how the industry is doing. This slide is giving us an indication of in which particular sectors we see growth in GGR. And as I indicated earlier, you'll see the betting sector steadily showing growth. The casino sector is still busy with recovery. And we've seen also steady growth in terms of the bingo and LPM sector. Again, overall, the financial year that has ended, you will see, GGR is at its highest at 34 billion rand. This slide is showing a trend in the share of GGR and how over the years, each mode of gambling has been performing. We are concerned in terms of the casino industry, in terms of the continued dip. Again, what stands out is the betting industry. It had the benefit of staying open during the COVID pandemic. And I think the other thing that contributes is the ease of punters being able to provide or rather place their bets online as opposed to go to the actual establishments. This differs from the other modes of gambling. And then this slide shows the mode, GGR per gambling mode for the financial year. It's basically clearly showing, you know, how, for example, even in the provinces, we still have, we have Gauteng province accounting for the greatest share in gross gambling revenue, and then followed by Western Cape, and then followed by KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga and so forth. So we decided also to share this information to just see the trends. When it comes to tax collection on levies imposed, although the casino industry is accounting for less GGR, it still accounts for a greater share of tax collection, as is shown on the pie chart above at 44%, which is followed by the betting sector. So that's just something for us we needed to highlight. And then per province in terms of tax, we basically have Gauteng still leading in terms of greater tax collection, and then followed by the Western Cape and KZN and fourth. As I said earlier on, in terms of our mandate, we also monitor market share and ownership. We are looking at competition issues. In this area also, we steadily monitoring the mergers that take place or that are applied to at the Competition Commission. So in terms, as at the year ended 31 March, we had 38 casinos operational out of 41 licenses as gazetted, 38 are operational. We've given you a summary of, in terms of controlling share, Sun International accounting for basically 12 casinos. Tsogo Sun accounts for 14, and they represent, you know, the greater share of the casinos, followed by Piermont Resorts, and then the other casinos also follow. So we steadily monitor that from a competition perspective. And then this slide is showing ownership in the LPM sector. We had Vukani, which operates in 9 provinces, Gold Rush in 6, Grand Gaming in 3 provinces. So I'll just highlight the top 3, and the graph will show you the trend basically in terms of each route operator. So that's the LPM industry. For the bingo industry, we have bingo licensed and rolled out in 6 out of the 9 provinces, which is Gauteng, Northwest Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KZN, and Eastern Cape. And again, the graph shows basically Galaxy Bingo, which is operating in 6 provinces. And then you have Gold Rush, which is operating in 5 provinces, and then a fair spread amongst other bingo operators there, which operate in average 2, and then Viva Bingo and Palacio Bingo, which is basically operating in 1 province. So that's basically showing us the market share spread across the country, or rather in the provinces where bingo is licensed. So coming to our performance, we were able to achieve our targets. We had the outcome dealing with broad-based education. We had a yearly target of 10 educational interventions on the risks and socioeconomic impact of gambling. We conducted 14, so we overachieved there. And then we also deal with, as I mentioned, effectively monitoring socioeconomic patterns of gambling activity within the Republic. Here we had to publish basically 3 reports. We were able to overachieve and produce 7 reports in total. So that involved other research that we had to conduct. And then regarding the outcome on uniformity of legislation and basically providing advice that we should do, we continuously advise on regulatory or compliance matters that we pick up. We had targeted 4 reports and we were able to produce 8 in this area. Again, we overachieved. In terms of percentage uptime, because we manage the systems for the national registers. So it's national registers and the National Central Electronic Monitoring System in this area. Our target was to ensure that there's 95% uptime, and then in both areas we're able to maintain 100% uptime. And then moving on to the economic transformation target or outcome, we targeted 4 reports. We continuously monitor how PLAs in this area are dealing with transformation. It is a requirement in terms of the Act that issues of transformation are taken into consideration when applicants or operators apply for licenses. So we continuously monitor performance in that regard, and there we achieved our target. We were able to prepare and submit the 4 reports as targeted. This slide basically shows an indication of our revenue collection, which as at end of, well, we estimated to collect 240 million, and the actual revenue we collected was 259 million. And this basically includes our grant and the fees that we receive from the monitoring fee that we impose through the National Central Electronic Monitoring System, and also other revenue, which would have included interest. So that basically accounts for our revenue. Moving on to expenditure management, we basically received, for the financial year ended, we budgeted 232 million. Our actual expenditure was 237. Is that right? And then we basically, so in terms of expenditure, we reported a surplus of 20.2 million for the financial year ended, against a surplus we envisaged at 7.9 million. So the details also are in our financial statements. And then this brings us to the end of our presentation. So basically from an annual perspective, what we're basically concluding also is we are of the view, especially after the effects of COVID, we as a regulator sit at the convergence of technology and also, how the gambling industry continues to redefine itself. And we also seeing the introduction of technology as an opportunity for the industry to redefine itself, especially drawing from the lessons of the COVID pandemic. I could pause here, Chairperson, or should I proceed to the first quarter performance?
I think let's take your entire presentation and then we'll open up for questions.
Okay, thank
you.
You
can go into the first quarter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of our first quarter performance, we basically have 3 divisions in the organization. There are 2 divisions that are specifically focusing on the mandate. So the other one that deals with finance and procurement is not going to appear here. We had 13 output indicators and 13 planned targets. We achieved 100% of our targets for Q1 or quarter 1, and in terms of our budget, we have spent 22.75 for the quarter. So we are basically on track in terms of spending. Ideally, if we're to split the quarters, we'll be looking at 25%, but we are there, almost there. For Q1, and in terms of our strategy and annual performance report for this year, we have the national registers. Again, the target was 95%. We achieved 100% for the National Central Electronic Monitoring System. We had a target of 95% and we achieved 99.98%. And then we have the target of monitoring economic transformation commitments for HDIs in the mainstream gambling industry. There we had targeted to conclude one report, and we achieved our target in that respect, and we've provided the details in terms of what the areas that we're focusing on and considering in terms of how, for example, Sun International is performing. Our other targets in program 1 is conducting a technical analysis of gambling games and machines. This one, we have particularly been interested in this area because the gambling industry is driven technologically, through the presentation of gambling modes. And we do look into, for example, the LOCs, what gambling machines are being introduced into the country, gambling games, and whether they are licensed accordingly, even the gambling devices, and just to ensure that there's continued compliance with the National Gambling Act. And then we also have the output of ensuring that we at most continue to maintain uniformity and consistency throughout the Republic in terms of PLA's implementation of gambling legislation. It does prove to be a challenge now and again. We do this through evaluation. So after COVID, after the COVID pandemic and lockdown regulations were repealed, we were able to continue with our on-site evaluations. So in that area, for Q1, basically, we were able to look at Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal compliance with the National Gambling Board. And then we also, so I've mentioned, I think, the technical analysis. We also have targeted investigations that we have to complete regarding the circumstances of illegal gambling in this area. These are specifically the matters that we have to investigate in terms of Section 16 of the National Gambling Act. So if a person gambles illegally, the majority of them are online gambling, and that we have collaborated with the banks for the purpose of confiscations. If monies are confiscated due to online gambling, then those monies are remitted to the NGB, and that is then investigated by the NGB. If we find indeed there was a matter for a matter of illegal gambling, we then apply to the court for confiscation. So we did this year, we're able to, set out clear targets based on the number of matters we have. We've targeted on average 45 matters of the 173 matters we had from the beginning of the year, and we're able to clear 25% of that, which is the 45. Moving on to the second program, that is where we conduct we monitor market share and market conduct. We also do economic analysis and research on the impact of gambling. So we overachieved. We targeted one report, we're able to achieve 2. And then in terms of economic analysis, We continuously are monitoring how the gambling industry is doing, also its contribution to GDP, employment, various aspects in that regard. We also conduct research where required, or even benchmarking how the South African industry is doing against other jurisdictions. There we had targeted 1 report and we achieved 2. This is an account of basically how the gambling industry performed. So what we do is at the beginning of the financial year, we monitor the gambling industry performance every quarter, and we hence with the specification at the top there, where we mention these statistics are unaudited. They are finally audited at the end of the financial year. So our report is basically a cumulative report. And again, for Q1, we see the betting industry, retained, accounts for the greater share of GGR at 44.9% compared to other modes of gambling. Then Gauteng continues to account for greatest share of gross gambling revenue generated from the province, followed by Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. And then with regards to tax, we have the casinos are still accounting for the highest share of tax, even though they do not count for the highest share of gross gambling revenue. And from a province perspective, Gauteng continues to collect greater tax compared to other provinces, followed by Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. So that's on our market share and market conduct. As I mentioned earlier, we do conduct a quarterly economic analysis and also research on the impact of gambling. What we realized and found was basically the fact that the betting industry is reported to have benefited from the boost of the COVID lockdowns. As I indicated, it was more the ease of doing business in this industry, because gamblers could continue sitting at home, open a play account, and then basically place their bet online, as opposed to, for example, casinos or limited payout machines or the bingo industry, where an individual will be required to go to the establishment and place their bet, or basically interact with the gambling machines. So that we saw. And then we also did a study on, and we used, I think, UK as a benchmark. There was a study done by Deloitte, and it was analyzing basically, reasons for increase in gambling activities. The details are in our report, our quarterly report, and we thought we should highlight this during the pandemic. There are certain reasons gamblers basically forwarded as why they were interacting more with gambling activities whilst in that era. And in summary, some had more available time, some it was boredom, some it was financial reasons, and others indicated they were sent offers from gambling companies and hence they engaged. So we just continuously monitor from that perspective to inform also the impact of gambling, especially the negative impact of gambling. And then moving forward, we also continuously have to advise in terms of Section 69 on gambling regulation. So this we continuously do. We look at policies, statutory or legislative matters. We had the target to complete 1 report, which we did here. We met our target. We didn't overachieve. From continuing also specifically on the advice did touch base with the Competition Commission, and as I indicated earlier, we have seen regulatory or financial consolidations by licensing operators. We have seen the pattern, over the recent years where you have operators or licensees in one mode of gambling acquiring other operators in another mode of gambling. So we are getting notification from our sister entity, which is the Competition Commission for a proposed merger, for proposed mergers. So in Q1, we were dealing with the Tsogosan acquisition of Emerald Casino. And we did give the details in our quarterly report here. We've just given a summary in terms of the impact of the transaction on market share. To start with, the pre-merger situation, I think earlier on also indicated Tsogosan is the operator that accounts for 14 casinos. It has the greatest market share. And it's followed by Sun International and Piermont. With the three combined, they account for 98% of gross gambling revenue. In percentage, yes, it controls 40% of the casino industry, and it holds 2%. Well, basically, Emerald was holding 2% from a national perspective. So post-merger, we were then advising the Competition Commission that if the merger was to go through, it would account for basically 42% of the merger. So that's part of what 42% of the industry. So that's basically part of what we had advised. And we did also point out the fact that even from a provincial perspective, specifically in the Gauteng region, its share would basically rise to 47%. So that we pointed out from a dominance perspective. Moving on, we are entrusted also or mandated in terms of the Act to ensure that we are continuously balancing the negative impact of gambling versus the economic gains. So we plan two interventions per quarter to ensure that we are out there educating the public on the risks and socioeconomic impact of gambling. We're able to achieve 11. It is an enormous number. We appointed, and the reason being we appointed a new stakeholder manager, and they've been able to intensify efforts in this regard. And I think the last time we appeared before yourselves, we also had to address our efforts and interventions in this regard. So we're able to overachieve and do 11 interventions. We also contribute to the joint key performance indicators. We continuously report on the 3 joint key performance indicators, as we call them, JKPIs, that the minister has instructed us to contribute to. So we continuously basically draft reports in that regard. We had the output of ensuring how, from a gambling industry perspective, we can contribute to the outcome of increasing industrialization and localization opportunities. Our target, we had decided to analyze the feasibility of manufacturing of gambling products and services. And we were able to prepare a report and advise in that respect, and concluded that indeed there are opportunities from that perspective, because our local market is flooded by imported machines. Capacity would have to be developed in this area for more South African companies to get into this space to manufacture gambling machines, games, and there would be more contribution to this target. So those are observations we have made. And then the second one is transformation, was specifically to contribute to reporting on structural challenges and promotion of growth and inclusiveness in the gambling industry. So this one, we looked at structural challenges that exist within the casino sector. And we basically highlighted what the situation is in terms of Black ownership within Tsogo Sun as an operator and Sun International. Tsogo Sun is 51% Black owned. Sun International is 35.2% Black owned. So that's what we found in that area. The final JKPI or Joint Key Performance Indicator is the delivery on a capable state. Our target was to report legislative review of the National Gambling Act and regulations. Here we basically looking at, we are going to continuously analyze through the financial year how specific provisions could be justification for legislative reform in order to reduce red tape. So we analyzed the LPM sector, and it was envisaged that, this sector would be an industry with low barriers to entry, which could facilitate PDI's ownership and control. And at present, we were also looking at, the limitations from a growth perspective, basically, the limitations within this industry. And we're specifically looking at the maximum bet and maximum winnings one could have, and the fact that they haven't been revised since the year 2000. So we had made the proposal, if one is looking at inflationary expectations and reflecting on current economic conditions, what could be reasonable within this sector. So this is part of what we put in our report and sent through to the DTI. We've also highlighted that in our quarterly report. And then finally, from a financial perspective, we as at 30 June, the DTIC had transferred 21.8 million. We did accrue or generate additional revenue from other sources, which includes the National Central Electronic Monitoring System. So in terms of our performance, from a revenue perspective, we did generate approximately 70 million. And then from an expenditure perspective, as I said earlier, we did spend 22.7% of the budget. Our expenditure was 59 million as at the end of June, which includes also payment of various service providers, professional consulting fees, and administrative expenses that we incur. And then the surplus generated as at the end of the 30th of June was about approximately 17 million. So that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. We also wanted your honorable selves to take note in conclusion in terms of the betting sector, the share that it holds. I think we've mentioned. We've also noted we also see the notable trend in the strengthening of oligopolies from a competition perspective. I think that one I've addressed yourselves on the mergers that we see happening, where dominant players in the industry continue to apply to the Competition Commission and acquire dominant players in other modes of gambling. And then GGR being reported at its highest in history at 34 billion. And then also the fact that regulatory certainty is required for better regulation of gambling. Thus, pending legislation requires finalization. And we also wanted you to note the need for a substantive review of national and provincial legislation to resolve certain aspects within our regulatory framework for better regulation. Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. I've come to the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kongwe. The Portfolio Committee members is the report of the National Gambling Board. Can I take hands for inputs and discussion and questions of clarity? Members? I'm waiting for hands, members, for discussion, unless you don't have any questions for this entity.
Chair, we have Mr. Mbuyane and Mr. Malamakia, Chair.
Okay, I don't know why I can't see their hands. Okay, Mr. Mbuyane.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Chair, I have, let me first welcome the presentation by the National Gambling Board, and also appreciate the presentation. Chair, I have some few clarity-seeking questions. One, maybe it's in terms of the governance structure, and also the other one, it's a legislation. In terms of the governance structure, I just want to check, the question of the administration. How are they going to resolve that? Then at the, legislation, I want to understand, Chair, what is the process now? Because seemingly the National Gambling Board is there at the national level, and provincially we have provincial gambling boards. I just want to check, if they can tell us exactly how can we be able to assist the National Gambling Board so that it monitor all the provincial boards, because seemingly now each and every province, they have their own legislation, their own rules, they're doing as they wish, while there's a National Gambling Board that needs to monitor all the provinces. So in terms of the review of the national and provincial gambling board games. The other one is the participation, Chairperson, of the industry. More special on the KPIs, the joint KPIs. I can see in terms of the industrialization, a participation of all the masses of our country, more especially the poor, in terms of industrialization, and also maybe the capable state, which in terms of the red tapes, they are now red tapes reduction. How is the process moving? Are part of the people that are previously disadvantaged now part of the system now? And if not, I can see in terms of the report, they saying 35% is owned by Black and so forth. In terms of the transformation, how quickly can it be? Because transformation is now the policy of government. And if they are talking management and ownership of 34%, 35%, I think it's nothing. because we want the 50% and more. Thanks, Chairperson, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Malamacha.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Allow me to second the whip to say very good presentation, detailed for that particular matter. And if you listen to the report, they've achieved nearly everything that they've set out. I think they deserve a very round applause of hands there. It's just to, after I've been covered by some of the questions raised by Comrade Mbuyane, I will have the following one to say, as much as it is permitted to gamble, which we appreciate, but the consequences of gambling, it has an intent of bringing addiction to that. What awareness program do we have in place to deal with that? Because left it being that way, it has a tendency of destroying many families and many talents if it's not controlled. The second one is, what consequences management have you put in place to deal with those who dodge tax, in particular other provinces, as you were proudly pronouncing that Gauteng is leading? Now the question is, what is happening to those who are not leading, and what are the reasons, and what consequences management to have in place to deal with that? Not far from what Comrade Mbuyane asked, the question of economic transformation is good if we put it raw as it or generally as it is. We will be very much happy to be told that we are doing good when coming to this category, to be specific on youth, women, and people with disabilities, so that we are aware that you are also assisting in that particular vertical. Your target achievement of 100% compliance and decisions on the first quarter, very impressive, and keep the good work. We are very happy with that. Going to your target where you targeted 95, you achieved 100%. I think that is good. You must also be praised for that. There must be a thumb up. What other thing that you did very well is how you are dealing with the illegal gamblers, particularly those who are not complying. And the manner in which you are dealing with their consequences management of ensuring that you follow them into their banks and take everything which is there. I think, Comrade Chair, around that one, the board is doing very well, and we must be happy. This last question is going exactly to the first question I asked in terms of the categories. The high number percentage of the Tsoho also must tell us how many women are there, youth, and people with disability. Question is influenced by the following, Comrade Chair. If you have got two people, one is white, three people, one is white, two are blacks. And if you go to percentage and the two are owning, obviously you will think that is a bigger number. Only to find that if you are to count, is only two people out of the entire 50 million population of the country. So it needs to really assist so that when we say we are industrializing and we are industrialist, we must mean numbers, not necessarily percentage. That has got tendency of not necessarily giving the good line, but misleading. Thank you very much, Comrade Chairperson, and thanks to the board for a wonderful job that they presented.
Thank you very much, Honorable Malamacha. Honorable Motaung.
Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity. I'm mostly covered. Only a few questions. One, Chair, I just want to check, is the board having their assessment on other illegal gambling that are happening around our constituencies? If yes, what are those different gambling that are illegal that they have assessed? 2, is there anything that they are planning to do to try to address those illegal gambling? And in terms of monitoring, are they doing monitoring themselves in different provinces, or are they relying on the provinces to assist them? Okay, the last one I'm covered with, Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Motaung. Any other inputs? I see no further hands. Over to you, Ms. Kongwa, and you can refer certain questions to your team. I see there's another hand from Honorable Mbiani. Let me just take it. Honorable Mbiani, before you respond, Ms. Kongwa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, once more. Chair, I don't know, the WhatsApp it's down here, but I have clarity seeking questions as well here. In slide 5, there's an indication that the gross gambling revenue covered back to pre-pandemic level. I just want to check how many jobs were lost during the pandemic period, how many were recovered, and in addition, how many new jobs that were created, if any. The other one, Chair, the Competition Commission in its concentration report found that the gambling sector had grown in concentration, with large casinos gaining prominence like Tsogosan, Piedmont, Sun International, who account for 95% of revenue. Chair, what's the role of the regulator playing in the deconcentrating the industry? Because you only name 3 big companies here. And what achievement have been the NGB recorded in bringing other players in the sector? Chair, on slide 16, Simple speaks to economic transformation, but I think Comrade tried, and Honorable Malamecha tried to cover me on this one. Then the slide 36, you reported, indicated that you conducted 11 broad-based public education and awareness programs about the risk of gambling. How many of these were situated in rural areas and rural provinces? 11 broad-based public education. Let me just have the last one, Chair. What practical step is the NGB taking to support industrialization and localization in the manufacturing of gambling product and service, except for doing an analysis and producing reports? Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands. Ms. Kongwa.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for the opportunity to also ask my colleagues to come in where I'll need some assistance. I will call on them. I would like to start with Honorable Mbuyani's questions of clarity. Regarding the governance structure, I think when NGB is done with answering, the DTIC would be able to tackle that one. But what I can contribute to regarding that is the change in governance structure was impacted by the National Gambling Bill of 2018, which is subject matter for mediation between the 2 houses. And we await for that process to be concluded. And then DTI may contribute if they have anything further to say. Regarding legislation, in terms of your honorable member asking how NGB can be assisted, I think it also touches on the National Gambling Amendment Bill. We have been waiting quite a while for the legislative process to be concluded. So your intervention would be greatly appreciated. Beyond that 2018 bill, there are various regulatory matters. Can you hear me? There are various regulatory matters that require attention. And there's a various number of issues that we had planned to legislate on so that we can have greater regulatory insight into the gambling industry. Some of them were in the bill. For example, extending the National Central Electronic Monitoring System to other modes of gambling. So we are able to account for all the financial transactions in the industry. Other legislative reform that we wanted to pursue beyond the amendment bill that has not been concluded was also trying to deal with the issue of gambling operators, or rather specifically the betting sector, taking bets on the outcomes of lottery. So that also requires attention. There are matters that are sub judice or basically in courts dealing with that aspect, and we would have loved for regulatory certainty and the legislative process to assist in that regard. So we definitely need your intervention and assistance in that regard. The legislative review was planned two prompt, which was one to focus on the governance structure, and then the second one was going to look at the more substantive matters. And I think the record is there in terms of what the intentions were. And then participation of the industry. And I think this was from a transformation perspective, considering the fact that transformation is government policy. We have advised before to say, as it is, the gambling industry doesn't have a sector, or well, basically a charter. Perhaps development of a charter would assist. We have given that advice to the DTIC before. We have discussed with them. It is an aspect, if we're to get to that point, basically government and industry would contribute into that. For a charter, it would have to be initiated by industry. But we could at least get somewhere in terms of coming to an agreement as to how the transformation actually can be driven. We also of the view that is very important in terms of the fact that even from an economic development perspective, definitely the issuance of a license is a tool to drive economic development, create jobs, get investment into the particular province. So from that perspective, it would help. Legislation as it is in terms of Section 53 of the National Gambling Act, all it says is that a province may consider commitments that an applicant for a license makes. But there's really no onerous and obligation, that is clearly spelled out that makes it what is it? Yeah, well, basically that makes it mandatory. So from the perspective that, it can be imposed, It is a matter where proposals are made and then that is evaluated and monitored. And then we do find in certain areas, you know, there's been no commitment in that respect. Then, the other questions that came from Honorable Mbuyani also were, what practical steps are we taking with respect to industrialization? We are not able to, at this point, undertake practical steps because of our mandate. As you would know, provinces basically license. They have the mandate to license, they have the tool. And it's what we are advising to say, if there's various ways in which, okay, first of all, there's definitely contribution that can be made. If a PLA or a provincial gambling board has the power to license, they can definitely make contribution in this respect. And it could come through license conditions. We did advise and point out the fact that we have almost to none, no local manufacturers. They are, maybe one or two who have come forward to say they are very interested in manufacturing products, but as it is, the industry is flooded by all the imports, and there's ways in which even the DTIC, in terms of their ordinary models, could assist in this regard, which is through the provision of grants where funding is available if the industry is specifically targeted. So we were definitely looking at industrialization. Then again, in terms of, for example, even the opportunities in terms of exporting into Africa, there's a well-established gambling industry in Africa. We are well aware the fact that in certain African countries, the regulatory framework isn't as, greatly established as South Africa. However, South Africa has the opportunity to even export. If it were to manufacture machines locally, it has the opportunity to export into the African country. Once again, we have spoken to other jurisdictions within Africa. They also are importing machines. We were looking at this from the AFTEC perspective, where we have the agreements in place and industrialization, basically, even at a continental level, could be boosted through our local economy. So, yes, just to answer you directly, we see the opportunities, but as it is, because we are a national regulator who does not license, we are not able to take practical steps to implement industrialization. However, because we work with the DTIC or report to the DTIC from a gambling policy perspective, there's definitely opportunity, or even from a legislative review perspective, there's definitely opportunity. In terms of the role of the NGB in deconcentrating the industry from a competition perspective, and then also the other question was, what achievements do we have in dealing with market concentration? We have done what we can possibly do as our mandate requires of us, that, for example, if we observe unfair conduct or uncompetitive conduct in terms of the Competition Commission Act, then, or the Competition Act, sorry, would have to report to the Competition Commission. So prior to the continued participation from a submission perspective in the mergers that are taking place, we have last year or the other year put in a request for consideration of a market inquiry into the gambling industry. When we put in that request, the Competition Commission then produced the market concentration report, which we welcomed. However, we're still hoping to look at, an inquiry in terms of the Competition Act. It's either the minister who could put in that request, so we did write to minister, or the Competition Commission on its own accord. And we are concerned about the mergers. It's understandable from a financial perspective. We are not saying, there's been no finding so far in terms of abuse of dominance, but we are concerned, and we continuously monitor and report on dominance, either from, well, not either, but definitely from a merger perspective, and then market concentration and share. So those are the achievements we can report. In terms of market concentration and competition issues, again, it's within the purview of the Competition Commission in terms of their mandate to do, and we have not shied away. We've written to Minister and Competition Commission on those aspects in terms of our observations, and we have used our advisory role or mandate in that respect. From a stakeholder perspective, we have not gone to the rural areas. We are in discussion with Eastern Cape Gambling Board. So we are going to be doing, we're going to start with the Eastern Cape in Q2. We were able to establish the KwaNobuhle area and Butterworth area. So we definitely did not forget in terms of your advice, to specifically target the rural areas. We did have capacity issues, but as I indicated, we did get a resource to specifically focus on this, and there was concerted effort made in interventions. However, yes, now we are giving direction and monitoring that we need to go into the rural areas to assist. If I'm to move on, oh, sorry, there was one more question from Mr. Mbuyani on how many jobs were lost in the pandemic and have we recovered. I'll give my colleague Yvonne to quickly respond to that.
Okay, thank you, Chair. With respect to the number of jobs that were lost due to the COVID pandemic, we recorded just over 4,000 jobs lost in the entire industry when we compare to 2019-20 before the COVID pandemic hit. Particularly, it was the casino industry that shared most of the jobs, but we have also observed the bookmaker industry having quite a sharp increase in job creation between 21-22 and pre-pandemic levels. So overall, the industry has not yet recovered with respect to jobs when we compare before COVID and current 21-22. However, there are specific sectors that are already showing signs of recovery. For example, the LPM industry, as well as the bookmaker industry. So the two sectors that are still falling behind in terms of jobs are the casino industry and the bingo industry. And by virtue of the casino industry being the larger industry with respect to jobs, it's overall in terms of total jobs, we're still falling behind pre-pandemic levels. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. If we are to move on to Honourable Member Malamacha's questions, the first one was, what programs do we have in place? I think it was dealing with responsible gambling and the negative impact gambling. We have the South African National Responsible Gambling Foundation that has been established, and it is a license condition that every gambling operator contributes 0.01% of their gross gambling revenue to the fund, and they run programs. But beyond that, as we mentioned earlier, to say if we were at the point where we had been able to finalize the initial amendment bill and actually be dealing with the more substantive bill, we were looking to setting up a rehabilitation program or responsible gambling program within the NGB. That way, then government itself will have specific and direct plans to implement such a program, because even when we've made comparisons with other jurisdictions, there are various models in which responsible gambling can be dealt with. We're also looking into research in terms of looking at it, from a public health perspective, like the way drug or alcohol addiction is dealt with. Right now, people just get counseling through the foundation, and it basically ends there. So we have seen other jurisdictions have various models in dealing with responsible gambling. It's definitely on our radar. We also acknowledge the unfortunate harm that it does to families in the community out there, and it is a concern for us. And through legislation, the plan was to ensure that perhaps government should take control of this aspect and establish a program. So these are aspects that did appear in various versions of the bill, and we're going to find their way into the greater or the greater amendments to legislative review in the area. Then from the perspective of what are we doing with respect to PLAs who are not necessarily progressing in terms of market share, we don't have a specific mandate specifically that would talk to, from a consequence management, unless there is a transgression or contravention of the National Gambling Act. However, we do in our oversights, we do question, our colleagues in terms of what bottlenecks they're experiencing in terms of rolling out modes of gambling. We do interact from that perspective. We can give you an example for like the limited payout machine industry. Through the National Central Monitoring System, we're able to monitor the basically active machines, which ones are withdrawn, and if a province reflects a particular dip, we talk to them. We also have the reasons reported. For example, if there's a regression, a province will say maybe an operator has surrendered their license or they're renovating their property. So we at least continuously monitor from that perspective. Other modes of gambling like casinos, they are definitely within the provinces. They're well established. What we can share, as I indicated earlier, 38 are operational. Then, for example, we have 3 that have not rolled out their last allocation of casinos, which is Mpumalanga, Northwest, and Free State. However, we were visited by KZN Gambling Board, who have expressed an interest in motivating for another casino based on socioeconomic studies they have done within their province. Again, that would require legislative intervention. So there are those kind of discussions that take place. We do also we've pointed out our concern in terms of the stagnation of the LPM industry rollout, where provinces, I think from 2000 and when was it? When did the first LPM get connected? In the 2000s, LPMs were connected, and they haven't. The rollout hasn't been progressive. So we do have those kind of discussions, but these are not matters where that would call for punitive measures unless there is a breach of the act. So that's what we are able to do. How are we dealing with illegal gamblers? With illegal gambling, I think it'll also touch a bit on Honorable Mutawing's question. I'll allow my colleague to come in and contribute, but I just wanted to mention that when it comes to illegal gambling, at least in terms of the legislation, we are empowered to ensure that we confiscate proceeds of illegal gambling, so that we are able to do. As part of the legislative review, there was a proposed provision that we as the National Gambling Board should have the power to directly deal with enforcement issues. However, as we mentioned earlier, that bill is still subject matter of mediation between the two houses. So we're not sure when that will be resolved, but we envisage a situation where we have contribution to make from that perspective if we had the legislative authority. As it is, we do have authority, but definitely it's limited, and it's based on an invitation of the province to collaborate with us to deal with illegal gambling. So we do interact with the provinces. We have, from our perspective and from an intergovernmental perspective, ensured that we facilitate, even with the National Commissioner's Office, with respect to police issues. We have ensured that we continuously call on provinces and even stakeholders in law enforcement, for example, FIC, NPA and SAPS, and we've been participating in those stakeholder committees that have been established to address illegal gambling. So that exists, and we do report on that. I'll allow Mr. Mashamaite, the Chief Compliance Officer, to give more detail on illegal gambling.
Good morning, honorable members. As indicated, the National Gambling Board also engage with other law enforcement bodies through the Stakeholder Priority Committee to address illegal gambling, where we actually meet with the police and the other bodies like FIC and the NPA to ensure that we come up with strategies to combat illegal gambling, and also ensure that the police do follow up on illegal gambling activities. And through these efforts, in the past quarter, there were about 3,312 cases that were reported, and that is in the first quarter of 2022 financial year, and about 1,518 cases came up with a guilty verdict for the people who were accused, and we still have 2,751 cases that were pending in the first quarter, and 1,318 cases were withdrawn, which is also remaining a concern for us, and 58 cases led to a not guilty verdict. So we are actually working with the NPA, mostly to ensure that these crimes are prioritized like other crimes that are reported daily to the police. And in the previous financial year, we also saw a number of cases, 4,887 cases that were reported through this effort with the police, and 2,438 cases were the guilty verdicts, and 1,586 were withdrawn. 795 cases were pending in that financial year. So we are trying to enforce this earnestly so that we can actually win against illegal gambling. We also, as indicated, confiscate winnings, and in the past quarter, we reported about 84,873,000 that was referred for forfeiture, which must go to court to be forfeited to the state. And there was also, in addition to that, 8,678.21 euros and $455 as well in the money that we also confiscated in that quarter. So this is the progress that we also make. And in addition to that, the National Gambling Board also working with the provincial licensing authorities. We also have a register that we manage on illegal gamblers operation report, where we also receive reports from the provinces on how many cases were reported to the police, and how many raids were conducted, and how many equipment were seized and destroyed as well after that. And in Gauteng, 10 cases were reported to the police, 72 raids were conducted, and it was found that 69 was on the normal gambling that we have, and 3 on internet gambling. And then equipment that was seized included 88, 79 on the traditional form of gambling, and 9 computers offering illegal online gambling were also confiscated. So number of destroyed items in Gauteng were 126. And in the Eastern Cape, also 21 cases were reported, and the raids that were conducted, 17, 13 on the traditional side and 4 on internet gambling. And the equipment that were seized were 33, which included 29 traditional machines and 4 internet sites. And there has not been any report yet on how many were destroyed. That will be reported later. Western Cape had 9 reported cases, 9 raids that were conducted, and the devices that were confiscated were 13, and 6 was reported destroyed, and that was in around between May and July 2022. Mpumalanga, 27 cases were reported. There is no progress yet on how many equipment were seized and destroyed as well. KwaZulu-Natal, 13 cases reported to the police. 1 raid was conducted, and the raids that were conducted in KwaZulu-Natal were 39, and the equipment that was seized from there was 14 machines and cash of 14,402, and no reports on the destroyed items. So these are the efforts that we participate in directly as the National Gambling Board to try and combat illegal gambling. It is also our strategy that in the next financial year, we will also be on the streets as well to directly identify these activities as well and ensure that the illegal gambling operations are reduced.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. We just wanted to deal with 3 questions. I think we left out 3 questions from each of the honorable members who had posed questions to us. I'll start with the question that Honorable Malamacha had requested whether there are specific programs for youth, women, people with disabilities in respect to transformation. So we are not aware of anything specific that the provinces or specific programs that the provinces are implementing, because the aspect we have been monitoring is the transformation efforts or commitments that are made stipulated in the act at the time of licensing. So our answer at this point is there is actually nothing specific we're aware of. And then there was a question from Honorable Motaung regarding whether as NGB we have an assessment of other illegal gambling happening in various constituencies. So this one, I think, cuts across the country, and it's the innovation in the betting sector. So traditionally or historically, we had the betting sector licensed at a provincial level to take bets on contingencies. So the first thing in our view, we don't agree is betting operators taking bets on lotteries. And we said that issue is subject matter of litigation. The other observation we have made is betting operators are providing online gambling games, and they are only licensed in terms of legislation to take a bet. So literally an individual can come and place a bet on a contingency or the outcome of an unknown outcome of an event. But what we have observed through our technical section is they are actually providing online games. And we are looking into it. We have started by talking to the laboratories, the testing laboratories, why or how, in their view, they have ended up issuing LOCs. Our end, we have spoken to certain provinces. From that perspective, we have notified the NRCS. We would also like to speak to them because the test report then informs the issuance of the LOC, which the province then uses to license a particular game or product. So we have those this particular aspect that has emerged, at the time we've come out of lockdown, and then the informal, for example. What we do not see would have been, your FAFI that has been in place. Yes, and illegal online gambling, and that happening in the internet cafes. So that's what we have. So from a monitoring perspective, we are talking to regulators who are in the value chain of, the ultimate licensing of these online games, which from the perspective of a betting licensee, that was never the intention, but things have changed. So we are concerned and we're dealing with that. And in our reports, we have, we continuously report on the specific instances we pick up. And then just to close off on Honorable Mbuyani's question, in terms of legislation, what we left out, I think because he mentioned the fact that, we have this myriad of various pieces of legislation being promulgated at national and provincial, and what assistance, Parliament could give us. And we have actually thought of it, tried to deliberate that perhaps having one national piece of legislation to regulate gambling would assist, as opposed to having a National Gambling Act and provincial gambling acts. In other industries, that is possible, because if one is to look at DTI's role, minister is empowered to set the maximum number of licenses is empowered to determine which mode of gambling gets legalized. I think the uniformity issue and consistency issue will be better served having one piece of legislation in the Republic to regulate gambling. Other jurisdictions do that as opposed to having 9, but you know, that shouldn't be, our proposal shouldn't be construed as, you know, an attempt to try and perhaps take away the authority that provinces have. But if everyone could make a reference to one piece of legislation, I think there are a lot of challenges that we would overcome, and everyone will be able to pull in the same direction in terms of ensuring that they serve government priority and policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kongwa. I see a hand from Honorable McPherson. Do you have a follow-up question, Honorable McPherson?
Yes, thanks. And I do apologize because I was on a delayed flight, so I might have missed the first round of questions. But just a few points, if I may. Ms. Kongwa, I would really advise you to not even wade into the idea of of a common sort of piece of legislation that would govern 9 provinces on the issue of gambling, because it is an exclusive mandate. It is one of 2 exclusive mandates as enshrined in the Constitution. So it would require a constitutional amendment. And I can assure you that all 9 provinces would fight the government like they have done on the amendment bill, because it is an exclusive mandate that they do have. The issue is not about serving government priorities, as you would put it. The issue is the lack of legislation and regulation on gambling, particularly online gambling, which the department, which is not your fault, has been in complete dereliction of duty for over a decade on this issue. And so, you know, I can understand that provinces have said, well, you know what, if national government is not going to assist us on this issue, we're just going to go it alone and we'll do our own thing, which is why the Mpumalanga regulator effectively licenses online gaming as they do, because they're tired of waiting for national government to do its job. And quite frankly, I think that it is laughable when we are told that $400 was confiscated in online winnings in the last quarter, 6,000 euros and 80,000 rand. This is a multi-billion rand industry that is taking place completely out of sight and out of reach of government, because government flatly refuses to do anything about it. And I think the question really for the DTI has to be, Chair, why do they keep dragging their feet on putting a bill to Parliament relating to online gaming? And it is, I can answer the question for them, because it is purely an ideological issue where they believe that they can ban online gaming and that it just doesn't take place. And the biggest losers of that are actually the state, treasury, and patrons of gaming in South Africa, because they have no rights or recourse to any protection like land-based casino players would. So my question simply to the DTI is, will you support the private members bill that I'm going to put on the table that will effectively and finally regulate and legislate online gaming in South Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take the second follow-up question from Honorable Malamecha.
No, thanks, man. Let me start by posing the issue here of FAFI. I had colleagues who said they are working with the police trying to shut down all the illegal gambling. Then the question will be, What are you doing in terms of the FAFI? Because it's seen every day in the township and everywhere where they can operate. Now, Chairperson, I want us to never try to be an entity outside the government mandate. I think it is very clear when they're saying through their mandate, they are able to certificate close to 14,000, which it will never be a laughing stock, except to say it is a good step towards the right direction comparing to the outgone government of apartheid, where there was no transparency. At least here we are trying, because crime is done everywhere, the entire world. But if you're not starting somewhere, you'll never clamp down illegal gambling. That is part of crime itself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Mbiani.
Chairperson, thanks, man. I even tried to put my question on the chat. But the chair, I just wanted to understand what control and monitoring measures are in place to combat the underage gambling vis-a-vis the online gambling. Because now we were in a situation where I heard the presenter said at the time of the COVID-19, people were just sitting on their computer and the system and playing. How is the government being able to get what is due to them if we are monitoring the process? And also the everyday lottery. Because our understanding is that the lottery plays twice a week. And now the 7 days lottery, everyday lottery. Is that possible? Or can we be able to do something with that? What is it that you as a national gambling board doing with this lottery every day? And maybe the last one will be the working relations between the province and the national, as I earlier alluded to. I think, yes, it's possible, even if we need to change the constitution for the betterment of monitoring and management. Because really, this is one country. We cannot have a law that governs provinces, and those provinces are governed at a national level, but they have different acts, like what is happening in the Western Cape currently. So we really need to at least have a synergy. Even if it needs to be, we can change that constitution so that one act govern the entire country. We cannot have these pieces of legislation in each and every provinces. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I think some of the responses must come from DTIC, in particular to Honorable McPherson's responses, and then Ms. Kongwa, if you can go, and then we can finish off with DTIC. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. My colleague, Mr. Mashamaite, will address yourselves on the issue of FAFI and what is in place regarding monitoring of online gambling and the lotteries.
Honorable members, yeah, just starting with the lotteries, you will be aware that lottery is actually regulated separately by the National Lotteries Commission. But in the forums that I've indicated earlier on in my response, the Lotteries Commission is also participating in efforts to combat illegal gambling operations that are happening. So we work together with them because there is interrelation between our roles. So to ensure that we combat illegal gambling. FAFI is also included in the activities that we are enforcing against to deal with illegal gambling operations. And this is some of the issues that we say we'll focus on. However, primarily gambling enforcement lies with the provinces, and we come at a later stage to intervene. Hence, our direct involvement with the police and the NPA to try and ensure that the efforts are broadened enough to deal with illegal gambling. In terms of illegal online gambling operations, as you have noted in my earlier response, there is indeed effort to try and deal with the illegal gambling operations, but they do happen in secrecy. At the most, we are dependent on the banks, who will also share with us information that there is a payout that needs to happen, which will come from an illegal gambling operations that we need to confiscate for possible forfeiture after investigations.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would just like to add regarding the monitoring aspects when it comes to illegal gambling. What we have considered, what other jurisdictions are doing. So for those who have legalized online gambling, and for those who, continue to prohibit online gambling. One thing that stands out is the fact that if you look at the gambling industry and its connection to the financial services industry, what other jurisdictions are definitely doing is, first of all, making sure that they have monitoring systems in place for all their modes of gambling. South Africa, we are not there. It's a proposal we made in the amendment bill. If we could get there, once we have monitoring in place, then legislation could also ensure that every gambler would be able to register. And then that way, you also bring in the aspect of responsible gambling and protection, because you know who it is gambling, and then you know that they are traceable. It will definitely also assist with other priorities, for example, for FIC in terms of tracing financial transactions. Our banking industry, as it is in South Africa, complies with KYC, know your customer, and all the declarations required. And the gambling industry, which is dependent on actually a financial transaction or exchange of money for a gambling activity to happen, doesn't have these things in place. So what we are saying is there are things that would be required before one would have to go the next step of saying we can, we are ready to venture into other modes of gambling, as we call online gambling, or perhaps casinos being provided online. Without the monitoring systems and looking at how advanced technology is at this point, we are really at a back footing. So I hope that assists in terms of what it is and what control do we have. The other control other countries have would basically be, blocking of websites. We have explored the blocking of websites. What we are able to do is basically, go to the South African registry, or the ZA registry that works with Department of Communications, and the IS Internet Service Provider Association. For those who belong to that association, they have measures in place for takedown notices for websites, but usually it's the non-South African domain websites that are difficult to deal with because they are not registered or regulated in South Africa. But what we just wanted to answer is just that aspect, or well, for me to say, you definitely would need all your systems in place to have a greater monitoring and control. And then you also bring regulatory certainty. As we concluded our presentation, that's what we were saying, to say, even learning from what has been the outcome from the COVID era, we don't have a problem with operators innovating, but the question is, how do we all get to the point from a regulatory framework perspective? This is national and provinces. Hence, we're saying, yes, if it means we have one piece of legislation, so be it. And we are cognizant of the fact that, yes, if it means a constitutional amendment is required, so be it. It is one country, and we welcome what Honorable Mbuyane was advising, and we appreciate also the input from Honorable McPherson. With greater control and monitoring systems in place, also having a regulatory system that supports what it is we want to achieve, then one is able to provide regulatory certainty and achieve, what the priorities are that are set out. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I see there's another hand from Honorable Burns Nxumashe. Members, you're all over the place. I've been calling for inputs. Honorable Burns Nxumashe.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. I think, Chair, I've been ruminating over the issue of ills that go along with gambling, while equally appreciating the good revenue that it generates. The issue, Chair, that I'm trying to understand is the strategy of dealing with those who are serial addicts, because gambling is addictive and it has contributed so much in the disintegration of social institutions, especially at the level of family units. It has contributed quite significantly also, not only to the disintegration of social institutions being family, but also issues like alcoholism, and you can make mention of a number of them. Now, is there any system in terms of which there's a strategy to mitigate those negative effects, while also being appreciative of the revenue, so that we're not only seen as appreciating the revenue. I remember one person in the National Lotteries used to say, National Lotteries is not a gambling, but it's a game of numbers. So in this regard, I just want to check that aspect, which would in a way contribute towards the sustenance of the moral standard of society in the context of what we actually see as the degeneration of same. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can you then just answer the last question by Honorable Burns Nxumashe, Ms. Kongwa, and then I'll hand over to the department.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Our response to that is there definitely is a strategy in place. What is peculiar to the gambling industry is the licensee funds intervention regarding the negative impact of gambling or the negative effects. And hence we made reference to the South African National Responsible Gambling Foundation, which the operators funds. So that is the model. And we were also adding to say, a step further, we were looking at, you know, governments, what role government can play. In our legislation, we have the self-exclusion regulations which tie into the counseling process, but actually the first step is the exclusion, self-exclusion. The law also stipulates an individual, or sorry, a family member, in their view, or if they're of the opinion that their family member is really out of hand and they're being impacted, they can actually make an application to court. But we have tried to, you know, deal with these aspects in the version of the gambling bill that was to, you know, go before Parliament if we were to have concluded the one pending before Parliament. So definitely from a national perspective, the strategy is in place. Even in terms of our mandate and legislation, it is recognized. We should monitor the negative effects. However, we were working towards, with the DTIC, to ensure that we actually are empowered to implement a rehabilitation program for individuals and families that are negatively impacted by gambling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. DTIC, Ms. Matomela.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Zandile Brown will respond to the question by the Honorable McPherson.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and members, and good morning. In terms of the comments and the questions from Honorable McPherson, we are noting them. And in terms of the question that was earlier asked with regards to the issue of the amendment bill, as Ms. Kongwa has indicated, the issue is waiting for the mediation process to be a session to be scheduled and the process to go through the mediation process. And the issue of the administrator, because the bill provides for the appointment of a chief executive officer, and that process cannot be done until the bill is finalized. Therefore, we still have the issue of the administrator still being in place until the issue on the bill is concluded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes our session for today, and I thank the team from the NGB for very professional and smooth presentation, and then also to Team DTIC for being part of our meeting. Thank you, members. Can I then just hand over to the committee secretary to make announcements as is necessary?
Good morning, Chair. Chair, we are meeting tomorrow and we will be considering the NLC's annual report as well as its first quarter financial and non-financial performance for the 2022-23 financial year. That's the schedule for tomorrow. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, members. That concludes our meeting for today. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.
Long live the chair. Long live Chairperson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.